Imagine a company, not a country, not an empire, a company with its own army, a company that collected taxes, controlled cities, started wars, and ruled over millions of people. At its peak, it was more powerful than most nations on Earth. The strangest part? It started with a simple goal: selling spices. This is the story of how a small trading business became one of the most powerful forces in human history, the story of the British East India Company. A company founded by London merchants who wanted to sell spices, pepper mostly. That's the whole original ambition. And yet, within a century and a half, this company had its own army, larger than most European nations. It printed its own money. It ran its own courts. It toppled kings. At its peak, it controlled the trade and governance of a subcontinent of 200 million people. This is the story of the British East India Company, the most powerful corporation in human history, and the one most people know almost nothing about. The year is 1600. Queen Elizabeth I signs a royal charter giving a group of London merchants a monopoly on trade with the East. Their goal is simple: buy spices in Asia, sell them in Europe at a massive markup, and repeat. For the first few decades, that's exactly what they do. They establish fortified trading posts on the Indian coast, in Surat, Madras, Bombay, and eventually Calcutta. Business is good. Then, slowly, almost without anyone deciding it, everything changes. The problem starts with protection. You have warehouses full of valuable goods in a foreign country. You need guards, so you hire guards. The region becomes unstable. Local rulers fighting each other, bandits on the roads, so you build walls. The walls need more soldiers. The soldiers need commanders. Commanders need weapons. Suddenly you have a private army, and you're not entirely sure how it happened. This is what happened to the East India Company, scaled up to a degree that seems almost fictional. By the early 1700s, the Mughal Empire, which had ruled most of India for 2 centuries, was fracturing. Regional powers were fighting for control. The company, already on the ground with money and soldiers and relationships, found itself pulled into these conflicts, sometimes as a hired ally, sometimes simply because a conflict was threatening their trade routes and they decided to resolve it themselves. One logical step at a time, a pepper merchant was becoming an empire. The man who turned this drift into deliberate conquest was Robert Clive, a low-level company clerk who arrived in India miserable and unremarkable, and left as one of the most consequential figures of the 18th century. In 1757, he led company forces at the Battle of Plassey. The company's army faced the Nawab of Bengal, ruler of India's wealthiest province. Through military tactics and, more importantly, a bribe to the Nawab's own general to betray him mid-battle, Clive won. Bengal, with its enormous tax revenues, its rich farmland, its world-famous textile industry, fell under company control. A trading company had just become the de facto ruler of the most economically productive region in Asia. What followed is a period historians struggle to describe without running out of adjectives. The company looted Bengal. Officials with almost no oversight from London extracted wealth on a staggering scale. Tribute from local rulers, manipulated trade deals, military contracts that were essentially extortion. Clive returned to England with a personal fortune worth hundreds of millions in today's money. When Parliament asked him to account for it, he said, with genuine bewilderment, that he was astonished by his own moderation. He meant it. The system told him at every turn that what he was doing was not just legal but admirable. By the mid-1700s, the East India Company had become something that had never existed before in history. It was simultaneously a private business answerable to shareholders, a military power with its own standing army of 260,000 soldiers, a judicial authority that ran courts, a diplomatic entity that signed treaties with sovereign nations, and a governing body that collected taxes from millions of people who had no say in the matter. All of this under a royal charter from London, but London was 6 months away by ship and couldn't enforce much of anything. In 1857, the company's own Indian soldiers, the Sepoys, mutinied. The immediate trigger was almost absurdly small, a rumor that new rifle cartridges were greased with pagan cow fat, offensive to Muslim and Hindu soldiers who had to bite them open. But the cartridges were just the match. The powder had been building for decades. Resentment over land seizures, cultural humiliation, and the systematic extraction of wealth that had impoverished a subcontinent that was once the richest in the world. The rebellion was violent. The British response was savage, and when it was finally over, the Crown looked at the company that had caused it and made a decision that was probably a century overdue. In 1858, the British government dissolved the East India Company and took direct control of India. The company that started selling pepper, that had governed a subcontinent for 150 years, simply ceased to exist. The East India Company wasn't run by monsters, it was run by rational people making rational decisions in a system with no mechanism to stop them. The horror was emergent. It came from the structure, not the intentions. The company is what you get when a profit-seeking entity acquires state-like powers with no democratic accountability. When shareholder returns become the only metric and there's no countervailing force, no regulation, no free press, no electoral consequence, you don't get occasional bad behavior. You get a company that runs a continent for its own benefit and genuinely can't understand why anyone is upset about it. The company was dissolved in 1858. Its London headquarters was torn down. Almost nothing physical remains. But the world it made, the economic structures, the inequalities it created and locked in, the borders drawn for commercial convenience, that world is still very much with us. We're all, in one way or another, still living in the East India Company's world. Thanks for watching. See you in the next one.